I want to welcome you to day 254 of Humanity Rising. On Friday of last week, we commemorated the first year anniversary of Humanity Rising in a celebration of love and affirmation for everything that we have done together over the last year, as we've provided a service with over 350 partnering organizations to people literally all over the world. We've had registrations from over 130 countries, broadcasting out to 15, 20,000 people a day, sometimes more. We've had over 900 speakers. We've spawned several dozen initiatives and partnerships that are morphing Humanity Rising from just passive viewers to an active coalition that is coming together in the name of love, in the name of solidarity, in the name of healing and resilience and regeneration. And I just have to say, since I was the recipient of many of the affirmations on Friday, how moved I was, how deeply grateful I am. Emails have been coming in over the weekend. I've been just basking in the goodness that all of you express day by day, as all of you seek to enable humanity to rise at this critical moment in the human journey, and to regenerate through using the opportunity that the crisis of the pandemic represents to usher in a new world. So thank you. The love is real. And that's an important consideration as we start the first day of our second year. We want to contemplate love. We want to contemplate how love is expressed through governance, through the polity, to ensure human thriving, human well-being, and most fundamentally, a resonance and an alignment between humanity and the larger living eco-field of life on Earth. Let us begin, as we always do, with just a moment of heart coherence. Let us center ourselves in our bodies. Let us close our eyes, take a few deep breaths, and let us listen to our heartbeats in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that we're alive. We can love at this moment, this extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. And now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you joining our session today, I want to commence the program by saying a word about the Brahma Kumaris, which are the group that is convening this session today, and the Spirit of Humanity, a conference that meets every 2 years in Iceland, hosted by the City of Reykjavik. And this year, because of COVID, they're meeting online the 5th and 6th of June. And we thought that we would celebrate the Brahma Kumaris, celebrate the Spirit of Humanity, which is dedicated to pondering and exemplifying what love means in governance. I first met the Brahma Kumaris many, many years ago in the late 1990s when I had the great privilege of working with Mikhail Gorbachev and a number of leading spirits of humanity to convene what was called the State of the World Forum. And I met through the forum a beautiful, lovely woman, Sister Janti of the Brahma Kumaris, who arrested me in my soul with her quiet, loving serenity. And at the time, I was going about 100 miles an hour, flying all over the place in perpetual motion. And Sister Janti represented a still point on the other side, a long way from where I was. But it was something that I always remembered and I've always cherished. And the Brahma Kumaris have always been a group that I've reverenced in a way because of the quietude of spirit and the selflessness of their love. So I want to welcome the Brahma Kumaris, and in this case today, Maureen Goodman, who works as one of the leadership group of the Brahma Kumaris in the UK. She's also the representative of the Brahma Kumaris to the United Nations in Vienna. She's on the strategic circle of the Spirit for Humanity Forum and has been instrumental in the development of that conference every 2 years. She's spent her whole life in service, spent 20 years working in the prisons there in the UK to generate through workshops and seminars a sense of well-being and compassion in the contradictions that all prisons are. So Maureen, I welcome you to Humanity Rising. We're very honored that the Brahma Kumaris are gracing us as we begin the first day of our second year. So welcome. I turn the program over to you.
Jim, thank you very, very much for that very kind introduction. Unexpected, actually, because, of course, actually the Spirit of Humanity is convening this, I would say, and Brahma Kumaris are very happy, very proud to be partners within that, together with many other partners. And I want to just first of all acknowledge our mutual friend, Sherto Gill, and she's the person who liaised with you. She's from the Gurand Hermes Foundation for Peace, a partner in the forum. So she liaised with you to make this particular session possible. So again, thank you, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's tuning in, and a very warm welcome to our panel today. And yes, so you know my name, you know who I am. But before I come to our panelists, I would, or let me say more conversationalists, because really we want today to be a deep conversation that will happen between the four of us, but then a conversation that we hope you'll all become, which I'm sure you will become, engaged in, whether internally or whether on the chat and so on. But I first like to introduce a little bit more of the forum, if I may. And the Spirit of Humanity Forum, it's a global platform for leaders and change makers to really explore their inner awareness and to explore the impact that the state of our consciousness has upon the state of the world. And, when we first held our first forum, I would say that the world was a very different place. This was in 2012, almost 10 years ago. And, concepts such as consciousness, spirituality, love, these are things that were kept a little bit more to the private sphere, or maybe the religious sphere, or the spiritual sphere, but they didn't quite mix with the mainstream, and particularly in leadership and in governance. And, at that time, I think it was the courage of and inspiration of the city of Reykjavik, and particularly its mayor, Jan Na, at the time, who said yes to hosting such a forum, because they too, and Reykjavik is a city of peace, Iceland, a place of peace. So good holding for the forum. But I think they recognized, as we did or do, that there has to be this shift, and it really has to come from within the hearts of each one of us. And so that consciousness shift, very, very vital to taking our world to a better place than it's in now. And so at first we really had a small gathering, and now in 2021, we're welcoming all of you to the live streaming of all the plenary sessions, and these things are so much more out there in the world, which is, and the work of Humanity Rising and other such organizations has just been so important, because we can only do this together. So change is taking place very, very rapidly in our world. And I think we have all been touched in one way or another, of course, by the pandemic. And of course, there's now a fragile ceasefire holding in the Middle East. There are conflicts in many parts of the world. And I what can I say? I could list them all, but of course I won't right now. But with such a rapid change, it indicates that there's a rapid shift happening in human consciousness too. So the question is, in which direction are we going? And can we, through our inner compass, begin to shift the direction, which I believe certainly that we can. But we really do have to be aware, I feel, and work with that principle of that whatever is within is reflected without. There's absolutely a connection. And with the principle of love in all its expressions, of compassion, of kindness, of respect, this is what's needed in the world. So we are really, I feel, in a spiritual crisis. I just wanted to give one example from the forum, which I think articulated so clearly for me this principle. It was the previous forum where Christiana Figueres, who was the Secretary General of the UN panel on climate change, the person who was credited with bringing forth the Paris Agreement. She spoke of her experience, and she said how the negotiations were very, very sticky. They weren't going anywhere amongst all the governments. And at that time, she herself was going through a very difficult patch in her marriage, and she had a lot of inner turmoil. And she said that she stopped and she went within and looked at herself, and she thought, well, I need to sort out what's going on within me. And so she began to ask herself questions. Who am I? What is meaningful to me? And she began to shift her consciousness so that she came to a place of peace inside. And she said, after that, the negotiations began to flow. And I thought that was a very, very interesting expression of the inner and the outer. And so we need to extend that to many, many more things. We're very fortunate to be joined by 3 very experienced individuals joining me on the platform. Thomas Brunn, who is the initiator and leader of the research group A Mindset for the Anthropocene at the Institute for Advanced Sustainable Studies in Potsdam. Imad Karam, the executive director of Initiatives for Change International. And we've been a little bit in communication. He's from Palestine, and of course, we know what has been happening. We're pleased for the ceasefire, and all our good wishes are with the whole situation in the Middle East. And Kristin Vala Ragnarsdottir, who is a professor of sustainability science at the University of Iceland. And I actually don't propose to give any further long introductions, because you would have been able to read those on the website for yourself. And so I would like to begin by asking each one of you who are there a little bit about your story. How come you're here? I don't mean how did you get here on the Zoom, but what brought you to this point that you're taking part in a dialogue and a conversation such as this, and that we're all together. So who would like to start? Welcome. Should I choose someone? Vala, you're smiling.
Yeah,
I was going to say ladies first.
Sorry.
Do you want to start, Imad?
No, I wanted to say ladies first, Vala.
Ladies
Oh,
first.
yeah.
We are good. We have a very good gender balance here, so we're fine.
We do. I'm happy. 50-50. I'm constantly reminding people of the gender balance.
Yeah, me too.
So and the importance of having such a balance. How did I get here? Well, it's been a long journey. We could say that in the year 2000, I happened to have a conversation with Richard St. George, who was then the director of the Schumacher Society in the UK. And the Schumacher Society was built on the memory of Fritz Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful, and many attribute his thinking to the sort of the beginning of sustainable development thinking. And what I realized in talking to Richard is that he was working on global issues in order to try to make the world sustainable. And I was working as a real scientist at atomic level, looking at the behavior of pollutants in water at various temperatures. And I had a real shock after having several conversations with Richard, because I realized that what I was doing was not really going to make very much difference for the future of the planet. So I shifted my work towards working on sustainability issues. And then along the way, I of course discovered that if I wanted to change the world, I needed to start with myself. And that is how I started my spiritual journey. And along the way, I came into, I was invited to come to the second Spirit of Humanity forum, and have been attending since. And that has been a real pleasure to be a part of this group. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Imad.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Maureen, I just want to acknowledge that I'm honored to be in your presence, all of you, today. And I feel blessed that the ceasefire is still holding in Palestine and in Israel. Otherwise, it would have been more difficult today. I was born and grew up in Gaza City 45 years ago. And back then, Israel was occupying the Gaza Strip. So I grew up under Israeli military occupation. And two things I would briefly mention that shaped my life while I was living in Palestine. One is the conflict and the occupation. And the other one is education. Because my family needed help to support. I come from a big family. I've got 9 siblings, and my father needed help. And so I had to work as a child. But my parents, who were educated, kept me in school. And I went to university in Gaza. And then I worked for the Palestinian Authority before I came to the UK. The two other turning points, one is the 9/11 attacks, or the 11th of September attacks in New York in 2001, have influenced my thinking and my reflections on finally, or realizing suddenly that I was Muslim. Because growing up in Palestine, I was Palestinian, I was Arab, I was a man. But when I came to the UK, a new identity I discovered was that I was a Muslim and perceived as a Muslim. And this was in 2002, in the wake of those attacks in the US. And then the other, and maybe final for now, turning point was meeting Initiatives of a Change, a global movement of people of diverse cultures and background who are committed to inspiring, equipping, and connecting change makers in the pursuit of a just, loving, and peaceful world. And just like Vala mentioned, the thing about Initiatives of a Change is it's an invitation. If you want to change the world, if you want to change society, the best place to start is with yourself. And offered me, and offers everybody, 4 moral standards of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, as a way to examine my life and one's life. Honesty in our failures, purity in our motives, love in our support to others, and unselfishness in our support to others, and love in our readiness to forgive and to accept forgiveness. So not an easy exercise, but it has certainly helped me have something to examine my life against. And maybe I'll just stop by saying that another aspect that has really influenced me and got me to where I am today from Initiatives of a Change is that sense of purpose in life. Why are we here? Why am I here? And what's my purpose in life? And that's, for me, culturally, my purpose in life. I grew up wanting to, get a good job, get a house, get a wife, get kids. And that's what I was thinking my life was going to be like. But when I left Palestine and came to the UK, and with all that, the background there, it's like coming out of the box. So I was able to look at my life and re-examine the purpose of my life and recognize that I am called to make a difference. Not for myself, that can happen, but to everybody that I touch or come in contact with. And that's probably what got me here, sister. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, so it's on me to complete our round. I always enjoy speaking last, so thanks for allowing me to listen first.
Well, I may say a little bit also. So
Nice. How did I get here? I think my journey probably is very much related to the picture that was above my bed when I was a little boy. It was the picture of the Earth seen from outer space. And as a young boy, I was dreaming of becoming an astronaut. And I remember how I continued to look at this picture, and I was just stunned by the feeling that this planet, like, this is the planet seen from outer space, and I am a little tiny spot on top of this huge being that's flying through space. And I feel this sense of marvel has stayed with me and is guiding my journey until today. And this journey has two facets. It has a natural scientific facet. I studied astrophysics. And on the other hand, it has a spiritual aspect to it. But the spiritual aspect always was a private one. And I was writing fantasy novels that tried to integrate kind of my spiritual process about making meaning, what it means to be part of this planet, and the natural scientific one to express my sense of marvel a bit through understanding the little bit that can be understood, so to say. And somehow this process brought me to the topic of sustainability, because I wondered in my fantasy writing, what could be a state of humanity to live in harmony with the earth, to preserve the beauty and co-flourish with the rest of this beauty. And so after my PhD, I did the turn towards sustainability science, and that brought me to the institute where I'm working now. And you mentioned, Maureen, that now I'm heading a research group called A Mindset for the Anthropocene. And that basically emerged from the observation that I couldn't do what I dreamt of, so to speak, because our institute is meant to support decision makers in gaining more holistic understandings of complex situations. And I realized all the beautiful knowledge that people have is not helpful if people don't relate as humans, and if they cannot speak from their deeper hearts and their real concerns. And most of my work was stuck with people fighting against each other and trying to convince each other. And I felt that element is part of the trouble that I witness in the world regarding sustainability. And maybe allow me to add one last point that came up while I was listening. I think part of my story is also that I'm German, because I grew up in a family, both my parents still experienced the war. They were born in 1935 and 1944. And it took me a long time to figure out how deep that traumatization of German history still persists in my culture. And I realized that for a long time I was hesitating to do anything looking forward. There was always a tendency of me to look back, and I didn't know why. And only in the last 10 years, I've realized how much it is this impulse to feel I cannot move forward as long as I haven't come to peace with what lies behind me. And I think that's a strong element of my family history that guides my journey. And maybe I'll say more about that later, but I feel it's also related to sustainability and my sense of concern about the state of the world, and even a sense of guilt, you could say. Yeah, I stop here.
Actually, I know we're going to move on in a moment, but and actually a few things have been said about me already. But I just want to pick up on what you just said now. And I've, of course, all my life, I've wanted to help people. There's been that drive to serve. And of course, the Brahma Kumaris became the right place for me. And of course, everything has its challenges. But I think I've been somebody who, even if I've been scared, as I often am, I won't say no, because I've known that, again, that's phrase, I'm called to serve, is so important. But just picking up on your last point, Tom, this thing about what we inherit from our ancestors, and I'm from Jewish background, and I have family in Israel, and Imad and I are very good friends for sure. But But it was only a couple of years ago that I understood this principle that we also carry, maybe from one or two generations. It comes somehow, whether you look at it in terms of the genes, but even if you look at it spiritually, somehow we imbibe something that is in the psyche of the generations before us. And this was quite a revelation to me, but it helped to free me from quite a few negative emotions. So I just, wanted to comment on that. But Tom, I think you have a question for us.
Yes. Sort of you bring us back to our earlier conversation a week ago when the four of us got together for the first time. And I really liked that impulse, because for us it was so interesting, I feel, to get to know each other. And I thought it would be interesting to pick up on the point where we ended last time, to continue, not what do we have to share in terms of what the responses are that we may have come to in our lives, but what are the learning edges that we are sitting with? What are the unresolved open questions where we feel this is where we don't get further and where we are growing at the moment? I felt we immediately got into a very inspiring exchange on that last week, and maybe we could pick up on that. And it became very alive to me also while the panel was introduced, and I felt like there are so many learning edges for me, and love is the one thing, but how to relate to when I cannot love, how to navigate that tension often. And I was thinking also of the situation now in Israel and Palestine. How is it possible to maintain and enact a state of love as we are confronted with so much suffering? I didn't know about your story, Maureen, that you worked in prisons. Well, that would be one of these edges for me, where I'd be curious, what are we sitting with as open, unresolved issues at the moment?
Maybe I'll try, if I may. We talked about it last week, and I'm still sitting with the question, especially having just heard you, Thomas and Maureen, on the question of history. There's so much pain in the world, and there's so much conflict. And often when you look into any situation of conflict, you will find that there's unresolved, unhealed memory, unresolved conflict, and unhealed memory. I say unhealed memory because it's the memory of the history. It's not the unhealed history. History is history in a way. So I'm just sitting with this question of identity and narrative, and how do we break? Maybe break is not the right word, but how do we transform the narrative? And then often there's one narrative on each side, and come up with a shared narrative, a shared vision that can give life or give birth to a shared narrative. How do we acknowledge the past as whether we accept it, whether we like it? How do we accept that it's sacred to those who hold it? So I'm just wanting to flag this because I've been thinking about it ever since we spoke about it, and just wanted, I probably shouldn't say more, but wanted to put it on the table, as it were. How do we deal with the question of narratives and history and identity, and how can we transform all of those into a positive space?
Can I add something to that?
Please.
Also, a continuation a bit from our last conversation last week was that what I'm puzzling with is how can we make sure that we are not stuck in the past, which is our history, and build a future for everybody. Not only humans, but also for other living species on the planet, which is what the sustainability thinking is all built on, that we need to live on a shared planet with caring for all life. And how can we then get everybody to want to be on the same boat, have the same vision? Because if we don't have a vision of how we would like that future to look like, we can end up anywhere, as Donella Meadows used to say, the renowned sustainability thinker. She said we have to have a vision and then find steps to get into that future, because if we don't have the vision, yeah, as I said before, we can end up anywhere. And how can we then get everybody to be with us? And I think the only way that I can think of is through many conversations with a number of colleagues is through dialogue. Through dialogue where we talk about issues that matter, and the issues need to touch our hearts, because we only look after what we care for, what we love. So if we do not care for nature, we are not going to look after nature. If we do not care for our fellow human beings, we are not going to look after our fellow human beings. So actually working through the heart is so important. And I was so fortunate to meet here in Iceland a woman from Pakistan who is a healer and a meditator, and she leads this heart meditation here in Reykjavik. And I have been joining her group until COVID, but hopefully we can start again. And there it first demonstrated to me how practicing heart meditation really has an impact on the way you behave towards yourself and towards your fellow human beings and towards the environment you're in. So working from the heart which is love, of course.
It's like a frequency, isn't it? You know,
Yes.
what is the frequency that's behind everything that I'm doing? This flow from within to thoughts, attitude, vision, consciousness, words, actions.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the heart frequency of the heart chakra is much higher than the frequency of fear and anger and frustration. So we need to lift our own frequencies and try to help others to get there with us, because whatever we project into the universe adds to the sort of universal vibrational frequency of the universe. If we just all could lift our frequencies and get others with us, I think that might be very helpful in the stressful times we have now, and help solve some conflicts.
I think something that I'm sitting with, that, you know, I can feel that in the world it's almost like you know, something old, if you like, is breaking down and something new is really taking birth. But you feel that the way things are going, that you really need a lot of power and a lot of strength to be able to move through these times. So I suppose if I have any dilemma in a way, even though I have faith in where we are going, I want to be sure that I'm able to continue to access the inner strength that will enable me to continue to serve no matter what is happening. Because I often think, you know, at times of difficulty or crises, and they come to us at different times in different ways, is it that, you know, I'm going to be asking people for help, or will I have that resilience and that inner strength and be able to use that power of love to serve? So where do I want to make sure that I continue to take that power whether it's from the divine, from my inner qualities, but that inner strength to me is so important. So I want, that's my little bit of struggle in a way. It gets so caught up in the doing and not enough in the being. Yeah. So that I can feel. Tom,
yeah, I resonate deeply with that, Maureen. That's exactly also my challenge. When I mentioned at the moment I'm with my family, like with my sister's family, and I think many people can imagine family is what can trigger you most. And it's, I resonate also with you, Christine Valla, about inviting into the dialogue and providing. And at the same time, I realize many people are not willing and maybe not able, for whatever reason, to tap into that space. And my struggle is, I feel I need to accept even the absence of love. And serving without the expectation, maybe even without the will to change something. If you know what I mean, it's so challenging because I do care about the people, about my environment, but I cannot make it. I cannot change it. Holding the state of being often feels like in order to stay present in that, I need to accept others may not. And that is terrible. It's so painful. It's terrible. And I'm suffering with them. And at the same time, I know it can even draw me into, there is a strong pull into it. And staying conscious enough, like you said, Maureen, of my own resilience and be aware, how much can I serve and how much can I not serve? That's, yeah.
But sometimes in staying with yourself and not trying to serve, you serve more. Sorry, Vala, you're going to come in then.
Yes,
Imad, please comment.
I was just, thinking of when I first started to teach and my students and discuss sustainability with my students, some of them were just not interested. This is when I was at the University of Bristol in the UK, and they went to the head of department complaining about what I was teaching then, because they had come to the university to learn environmental science and not sustainability. And I remember talking about this when I went to a conference which was called Be the Change in London. And I was saying to the people in my circle that I found this frustrating. And then somebody said, no, don't spend any energy of being frustrated about this. Just think about you planting seeds. So you're planting seeds out there, and then later on, when they're ready to hear the message, they will say, oh yeah, Vala was talking about this when I was at university. And I think you need to think the same, Thomas. If you don't feel you're reaching people, don't get upset. Just think, maybe later they will be ready. And they will pick, they will water my seed, and something good will grow out of it.
Imad, do you have anything to add on this?
My mind is going. I'm just sitting with the question of resilience here, and how can we protect ourselves as change makers, but also how do we break through into larger scale change out in society. And we need to reach out to leadership in the holistic sense, not just political leadership. And what is missing for me, and I'm just wondering, it's a question, is I am not seeing enough principled leadership, value-driven leadership in business, in politics, in science, here and there. So one thing is, how do we protect ourselves and our inner strength and consciousness, but then how do we also take it beyond us into the world in a way that will make a difference, that would bring down that level of indifference, greed, hatred, anger, inequality, injustice that exists. I'm sure we all want to see a better world, a more peaceful world, right? So I'm just sharing thoughts here. I'm sitting with those, and I'll add another question, problem maybe, that we may or may not want to discuss. But the truth is never been challenged as it is being challenged today. How does it affect us and our work and our world? How do we know what's true and what's the truth and what is a lie and what is fake? And with social media, with the eruption of all the technology, I am concerned that when we talk about narratives and being stuck in the past, these things are being reinforced again and again by more lies and more untruths about them. So I'm just also sitting with that question about truth. And it's really been fascinating to hear that expression that came during the past few years, alternative facts, right? How do we even deal with that? You don't have to discuss it, but I just wanted to put it also out there as we look at well-being and governance.
I'm curious also, Vala, what you're thinking about this. I mean, you're also a scientist, and I am very much struggling with the term truth recently. I feel even the notion to aspire to achieving a certain sense of truth can have something oppressive to the diversity of context-specific responses that people find. You know, it's an interesting dance. On the one hand, I really want to find insights that are valid also for other people than for myself. And at the same time, I'm aware my context, my perspective, everything is so limited. How can I even dare to imagine whatever I come up with sophisticated theories and whatever, may be meaningful for somebody on the other side of the planet to respond meaningfully to his or her life context? So what is truth at the moment? Is for me very much in question. 15 years ago, I had very different notions of what truth might be.
I understand what you're talking about, because in my scientific career, I have sort of, in many ways, swum upstream and not followed the stream, working on issues that the scientists in my sort of group of speciality do not think is terribly interesting or even important, but then have sort of come to follow later. And they have questioned my ability to choose the scientific questions that I'm working on. And I've always been able to just think, oh, they're stuck in their box, and I'm sort of exploring the edges, and that's fine. They can criticize me if they want to, but I'm going to continue down this path, because we need to expand our horizons. If science gets stuck in some old theories, then we will never make any progress. And the progress is made at the edges where different disciplines comes together. And well, I guess the truth you're talking about is some of this, misinformation that is being sent out. But that's populism. That's people who actually don't care how they get their votes. For example, in politics, they just throw out a bunch of lies and then hope that people buy into it, as we saw happened in the United States. But luckily, that force has now been put aside, at least for now. We just have to work against those who put out misinformation. That's the only thing we can do. Put out the real truth, or as opposed to the alternative truth, which is usually not based on any foundations.
This makes me think a bit about conscience. You know, when we think about truth, you know, we can say, what is the real truth? But you know, how many, you know, especially in leadership at the moment, how many are able to really follow their conscience? It seems like in so many areas of the world, it's like the conscience has gone to sleep, and the things that are happening that are working against human well-being, really devaluing human life, and really moving far away from love, which is the transformative power. But this is like somehow there's a killing of the conscience. And so when I think of truth, perhaps I can't have an objective, this is the truth, but can I more and more be true to myself and clean my conscience, so that I am, like Ahmad mentioned, the 4 values of initiative of change. I mean, that's really about cleaning the conscience, isn't it? Would you say? You know, honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. And well, just throw that out. I feel that's just very, very important for the conscience to awaken again. Then perhaps our decisions would be quite different. Mm.
Mm.
I think
holding.
there are actually many people who are attempting to lead with a loving consciousness. Can't say this word now.
Conscience-led, I think.
There's not enough, but it's rising, and you know, like Paul Hawken wrote about in Blessed Unrest, you know, it's rising everywhere in the different movements, in the social justice movements, and the you know, environmental protection movements, and the governance movements. Everywhere people are actually rising up and wanting things to change. So I think we need to acknowledge that that is also happening.
Oh. We can have a pause to reflect here if we want for a moment.
I was holding my words because I felt Imad was just forming thoughts.
Oh, come, yes. Please, please.
You keep spotting me, Thomas. A few thoughts, but I was probably reacting to, I think I saw just on my screen the word New Zealand jump out of the chat. I'm not keeping an eye on the chat, but I saw New Zealand jump. So my brain went to last time I checked the peace index, the global peace index. I think you will find that Iceland and New Zealand come to the top. And one thing that I know that is in common between those 2 countries is that they have women in leadership at the top, and younger women as well. Not that it matters, but it happens to be, you know, at least we know that the New Zealand Prime Minister is a mother, right? And I had the privilege of listening to the Icelandic Prime Minister when I was at the Spirit of Humanity Forum last time. So anyway, maybe there's something for us there to look at the role of women.
I actually think it is very important to look at the role of women, and that women have to stand up and show leadership. And it's interesting. This is actually something we're going to come to at the end, but I'll mention it here. Is that I'm a member and one of the co-founders of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And from that sprung an organization called Wellbeing Economy Governments. And there are 5 countries now a part of that. New Zealand, of course, is one of them. Iceland is another. And out of these 5 countries, the leaders are all women. Leaders are women in 4 of them, and young women at that, and they are all mothers as far as I know. And I think women have been able to also steer their countries in a more compassionate way through the crisis that has occurred during COVID. And this has been demonstrated now in scholarly articles that the leadership of women has been crucial in the countries that have done better in dealing with the COVID crisis. And they're also willing to put the mantra of eternal economic growth aside and say there are other issues we need to be looking at, and have developed well-being indicators for their countries. So definitely leadership of women and young women now coming to the fore are giving me hope.
Thank you, Vala. But the other thing I wanted to come back to is I understand the point about populism, but I am very concerned that the misinformation goes beyond that, and that the injustices, the inequalities, and the conflicts need to be maintained by more lies or by repeated lies. So it depends. If we want to be specific at a situation, we can look at it more specifically. But with us human beings, when it comes to our consumption of information, we often, this is from my media background, we often go to the channels that we want to go to, that confirm or reinforce our worldview. So just to give a stock example, if I'm sitting in the US today, I most likely will not be watching, CNN and Fox News, both of them I'm comparing. I'll be either a Fox News person, more or less, or a CNN person, right? But then it's the same with social media and which channels and who do you listen to. And these things, I think, will and are taking us further apart because there are hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on misinformation, not just by populist regimes, but also by other people who are interested. So I'm just concerned, and looking at the Israel-Palestine situation, there is a lot of misinformation, which is breeding and reinforcing hatred and anger on all sides. So anyway, just wanted to come back with that point.
Well, so since you are aware of this going on, and I'm sure you're right about the misinformation going on in the world, there are some very strong forces behind the scenes, trying to direct the world, huge corporations and the fossil fuel industry and the weapons industry and more. But how, if we are aware of it, how can we then expose it? The only way to expose it is to shed a light on it, and that will decrease the corruption. So it's incredibly important to fight corruption everywhere in society, in government, everywhere, and that's why I think people who are actually working on that are doing an incredibly important job for democracy.
I would like to add one reflection on this issue about conscience-driven leadership and particularly feminine leadership. sometimes I'm wondering, for me, it's only partly about whether it is actually women or men, but how much it is about cultivating feminine qualities in leadership roles. But that's maybe a different story. What I am sitting with is this tension. I totally share the observation. There are so many people who move into an intrinsically value-driven role of leadership as an act of care and responsiveness to the world. And I feel incredibly encouraged by this observation. At the same time, I'm aware that these people are moving into structures and historically grown conditions that are terrible for many of them. When I talk with them personally, I feel many of these, particularly women leaders, experience a culture of oppression and systemic violence. It is very hard for them to maintain the genuity of their original intentions. And what I feel crucial are these informal alliances where people support each other in staying true to these values while they are moving into structures that are not conducive to exactly these values. That's the turning point, you could say, that I feel we are sitting in at the moment. Structures that embody principles that now should not be reproduced by those that grow up in them, you know? And I have seen a few people who have really collapsed with this ambition to say, I want to serve. And at the same time, they said, but in order to do that, I have to go through structures that really in themselves destroy what I could bring from the heart into it. And that's terrible to see. And I'm challenged with this question, like, how could I support these people to stay true and to stay resonant with that intention?
I think that's a very, very key question. How we support each other, but how do we support those in leadership? People have a lot of courage and they're doing wonderful things, and they do need our support. And sometimes I feel our vision in terms of the future, but our vision with which we see things. I mean, I've had access to, people with incredible wisdom, and when they see something, they don't allow anything else to cloud their vision. Like, they believe in you in a way that they couldn't see anything else, and it's so important to stay with that purity of vision, and not be compromised by opinions and I think, and by fear, because I think a lot of things are so driven by fear. And I remember in one of the dialogues I was in, from the indigenous perspective, we usually say, okay, the antithesis of fear is love. But then he was saying that there isn't a word for love in indigenous languages, but it's about the practice of love, such as generosity, such as kindness. These are languages that express action. I mean, I don't quite know where I'm going here, but there's something about keeping something so alive that it begins to create an atmosphere in the world that others can get pulled into. At the moment, people are pulled into, many, not everyone, of course, into an atmosphere of fear. But it's bringing that atmosphere of love and generosity that can pull people, and respect that can pull people into that atmosphere. I feel that's just a thought.
I think that, brings us to the importance of language, because different languages are, people express themselves in a different way. And for example, now I've been working with a Wellbeing Economy Alliance since it was founded, and before that with people actually working on how to figure out how we could lead for well-being. And that word doesn't really exist in the Icelandic language. And so there is a campaign now going on between me and the Prime Minister as to which word to use, because I've got my cousin who is a linguist to come with a word that fitted with well-being, according to her definitions of the Icelandic language, and the Prime Minister is using another one, and this is the same. You know, I got funding for a project in Sweden, and well-being doesn't exist in the Swedish language either. And so whatever we are speaking about, we need to be, and we are talking to people around the world, we need to be aware of the fact that people express themselves in different ways in different countries, and often it's very difficult to translate from one language to another.
That's very interesting. Imad, you must find something of this in your filmmaking, because your filmmaking is to bring out these values and to bring out justice and truth and goodness. And I know you work with people of many different cultures.
Yeah. Thank you, sister. Often the solution is in bringing people to the space where that kind of miscommunication, misunderstanding, misrepresentation, difference in position and narrative and culture, if you bring them together into the right space, you will find that shift can happen and things can change. And so if we're only speaking one language, one narrative, one culture, and there isn't much progress that can happen. But if you bring the two into a space where everything is treated as a sacred and everyone is listening, then you will find that the language barrier, the misunderstanding, the misconception, the fear, even the anger can be transformed. And that's where humanity starts rising. But it is not easy to bring the right people to the right space. And it's a skill, and we're doing what we can in initiatives of change to facilitate that process of what we call trust building. Yes, I mean, even in a marriage, you know, the 5 languages of love. And so you really have to understand where the other person is coming from, what matters to them. What something might mean something totally different between me and someone else because we don't speak the same language or share the same culture. And it's fascinating. But once you understand where the other person is coming from, then suddenly the walls could come down and positivity can become possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. This reminds me of something you were saying, Thomas, before about in dialogue, the importance of being a reflexive, I think you used the term, where you really are challenging your own thinking and assumptions, right? You're not just saying, I'm right and this is the way I think, but it's that constant change and reflection. Yeah.
I was just thinking exactly of that, Maureen, as you spoke, Imad, because to me that closes the loop to this sense of marvel that I referred to in the beginning. It's this, I feel I'm always holding this strange, sometimes dysfunctional sense that every human being is a miracle that I can never really understand. I mean, we are making these strange steps to communicate by language, and most of us, we communicate in English. It's not our mother tongue. And where I've been in close dialogue with Chinese over the last 1.5 years. It's a universe behind every character. There is thousands of years of history, and how could I possibly try to believe I understand what somebody is trying to communicate to me? But that slows everything down. And it takes a lot before you feel, oh, there is something that we want to communicate with each other, and we are approaching it iteratively. And I let go of whatever I believe defines my identity, my concepts, and so forth. And at the same time, we are embedded in a world that is so much about functionality, about goals, about processes. Particularly, we haven't talked so much about governance, but the poor politicians, yeah, I mean, they have to negotiate with other politicians, and they are working with laws and structures from different cultures. I don't know, I feel pity with them because they cannot engage at this depth to really, just because they are forced into a speed that makes it impossible. You know, it's it's a pity. So I'm still sitting with the right space. Exactly as you said, Imad, there is a magic to that kind of space that allows people to connect at this level where real understanding, to some extent, can emerge. And it's beautiful to witness it from time to time, but I feel this is what needs to be advocated for, and share this experience so that people who are squeezed into very fast routines see, oh, it is worth slowing down. It is worth putting my lens aside, switching the perspective, and even in my logic, it has value. It's, I stop here.
At the COP conferences where Brahma Kumaris have been involved, we've always had a delegation for several years. The last couple of years, I haven't been, but we've brought together negotiators, whoever could come or wanted to be there, to have a day of silence, reflection, dialogue, some nourishment for the spirit. And even if they've come tired and, they felt very, very refreshed by that space where they could just be and be more in their being. And then after that, whatever our pillars of the forum, aren't there? They are listening, dialogue, silence. And so whatever comes out of that deeper space of silence and being, there's a much deeper connection. And the decisions, the possibility of compromise, the decisions, the ability to set aside the egos, which often get in the way, are just so enhanced by being inside with ourselves, even for a little while. I think that's just so key, and that's something that seems, although we do have in Britain there is mindfulness that happens in the Houses of Parliament, which is great, but I think we need more everywhere. We need that time to listen and to reflect. Yeah.
Yes, my daughter recently sent me, she lives in the UK.
Yeah.
She's a clinical psychologist. She recently sent me a book written by a Korean monk entitled The Things You See When You Slow Down.
Beautiful.
And it's full of fantastic wisdom. Yes, slowing down and like giving people space to think instead of just doing is very important. I agree.
Perhaps just before we now hand back to Jim, if there's any closing thoughts, just briefly.
I feel like sharing an image that came to my mind several times and that I was holding back in the last 30 minutes. I often felt about the same, like you described, Val, about the seeds that we plant. Recently, I've thought more of love as the water. And I feel water is shapeless, but it is a precious resource that I may hold to a little extent. And I was observing this issue about protection in the chat. And I feel more and more a responsibility for this water. Like, what are the seeds that I want to water with the few drops that I have. You know, I don't want to expand on it. It's just, yeah, I move a little bit from the seeds. Maybe all the seeds are planted, and now it's about using the water wisely and cultivating our ability to be droplets of water. Yeah, I stop here. That's my sharing to the end.
Thank you.
I like that, Thomas. Thank you for that.
Iman is frozen. Maureen.
Hello,
I'm
Emmanuel.
sure he'll come back.
Yeah. Maybe Vala, anything you wish to say in the meantime?
Yeah, I was thinking about Thomas's seeds. And I think, yeah, remembering to
Send a message.
give them water is important. But what I'm left with is the importance of slowing down. And yeah, that's something that I would like to think about more and maybe stop so much doing.
Right. Can you someone send a message to Imad to? Oh, he's gone. Oh dear.
Yeah, he's completely gone.
Yeah.
We lost him.
I hope
He
it
can
will
come back in again. He
It will
just
come
lost
back.
his internet connection. That's all.
Yeah.
There he is.
Oh, you're back, Imad.
Back.
We couldn't hear you. You kind of froze on us. So you have a final thought you want to add?
Right when you started speaking, you were interrupted.
Yeah.
Apologies. My apologies. I was just reflecting on humanity and how do we keep humanity rising and how do we reverse the tide. And I just wanted to share an example from our work when we bring people who are in conflict and who otherwise wouldn't be talking to each other into a dialogue. We don't really do dialogue. They would come into the space wanting to talk about the conflict or the issues that they have and fight for. And we ask them not to. We give them a board and say, just write it down, put whatever you want to about your conflict. But what we do is we go through a process of story sharing and pure, just getting, what was childhood like, what your memories, what happened, and in a very safe environment. And that really creates that sense of rehumanizes the other. That's what we experience. It really rehumanizes the other and it creates some connection. Then they can differ on the politics, on the history, on who did what to who. But ultimately, they start seeing themselves as humans and they start seeing that they can work together and they can resolve this issue that they're coming to. So just wanted to also share that from our experiences.
Thank you. Thank you. And perhaps we just take a moment of silence together to just reflect before I hand back to Jim and reflect on the insights we've shared and taken.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Thomas, Vala, Imad. This has been a splendid session on really the multidimensionality of the complexity we face in considering love through governance. And I want to, just because of the timeliness of the issue and the theme is love in a time of governance, Imad, would love to have your comment on the turbulence that's been happening over the last several weeks in Palestine and in Gaza and Israel, and what, in your opinion, concretely, would be some immediate steps that could be taken to bring more love and abundance and heartfulness into that tortured region?
Wow. Okay, Jim, that's a big question, but thank you. As I said, my whole family is in Gaza, and I grew up there my first 22 years of my life. And how to make this complex situation less complex? All I could say is that ultimately we are stuck in the narratives. We are stuck because of Jewish history and what happened to the Jews before the Second and during the Second World War in Europe in particular. The land of Palestine is the question. You have two peoples and you have a piece of land, and they've been fighting over it for 73 years. In the process, you've got one strong, powerful state for the Jews. And in the land today, you've got an almost equal number of inhabitants, but one is superior over the other. So what we are dealing with in Israel-Palestine is supremacy versus a humanity. If you go and ask individuals, you'll find that the majority of both peoples want to live in peace. But then you ask the same majority and you'll find that they don't trust that the other want peace. If today you go into Israel and say, do you want peace with the Palestinians? The vast majority will say yes. You ask them, do you think peace can happen or Palestinians will give you peace? The answer would be no. And the same on the Palestinian side. You ask them, do you want peace and live in peace? They'll say yes. Do you think Israel will give you a state and give you peace? They'll say no, the majority of them. So that's part of the issue, and that's part of the narrative that we live in today. But ultimately, and if we want to talk about the humanity, this is about control, it's about occupation, and it's morally wrong and indefensible. So if we want peace, we want to support the humanity and human rights for all. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Jim, but what we just saw and all the death and destruction will soon happen again unless we, whoever the we is, will deal with the underlying issue. And the underlying issue is one of inequality and injustice. There is enough land for both peoples. There is enough signs that they can live together in peace, but there is neither a global will to help them come together to a peaceful and just solution to this situation, nor that the peoples themselves managed but to get more stuck and deeper into their own narrative of hatred and and perceiving the other as the enemy, and in the process dehumanizing the other. The first time I met Israelis as civilians, which was outside of Palestine, they could not believe that I was A, Palestinian, and B, from Gaza. And I remember an Israeli lady saying to me, but you could be my son. You know, you're from Gaza? And I had just come from Gaza even. I haven't been living out for this long. So we are not seeing each other as humans, right? It's the enemy. And to justify my fight for freedom, I can kill for my right to be free. And the other will kill for the right to be safe and to protect what they've built. So it's very tragic what is going on, because it's at least as far as I'm concerned, it's a waste of a human life and a human suffer and a lot of suffering. And peace is possible and is doable, but it does require the courage to acknowledge what has happened in the past, to have a common vision, and to give back or to give for peace. That is not that there's a shortage of that at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I know we're pressing for time, but Thomas, you brought up a point that I think is fundamental in understanding the complexities of what we're dealing with and the challenges of organizations like Spirit of humanity in making a meaningful difference. The point that you made around good people entering in distorted institutions and being shaped by the institutions in which they're working to negate the very humanity with which they entered the institutions. And I just happened to watch a documentary on Netflix yesterday about Benjamin Fremish, who I'd never heard of before, but was one of the prosecutors in Nuremberg. And he was only 27 years old. And he just happened to have studied war crimes while he was at Harvard Law School, and ended up being called by the Pentagon to go to Germany to help prosecute the Nazis. And he got very successful judgments. He won all the cases, and the Germans were hung. And he reflected very deeply and said, even though it was controversial for him to say that, he says, these were not bad people. These were actually good people. One of them had 5 children. He spoke multiple languages. He had a PhD. He was considered humane by the people who knew him. And yet when he entered into the war machine, he ended up being responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews and gypsies and dissidents. And not a single one of the Germans that were tried at Nuremberg ever apologized. They all proclaimed their innocence to the end. And the point that Benjamin Fremish was making is that there's some profound impact that institutions and structures have on the way or not we express our fundamental humanity. That in fact, if you get into distorted institutions, you can so distort your own humanity that you end up as a monster, but you're thinking you're a good person all the time. And that's what Jung called mass hysteria, where he said, as he contemplated the Nazi phenomenon, that people can be individually very humane and civic-minded and loving and compassionate and have children and engage in all kinds of good works in the world, but they can collectively, through the institutions, engage in something that can only be judged to be insane. So I wanted to raise this for you all. Again, we're pushing time barriers today, but what Spirit of Humanity is trying to do, bringing love into governance for collective well-being, is, in my judgment, the $64,000 question that humanity is yet to solve because of the complexities. And I would love it if you would each take a minute or two just to comment on this. We could have a whole other session, Maureen, on this question, such as its gravity. But I just wanted to tease that one aspect out because I think it's the anvil against which human goodness continually is beaten by the reality of history. So maybe starting with you, Thomas, and then Kristen, Imad, and Maureen, I'd love to have your comments on this complexio.
Well, yeah, Jim, as you said, I mean, this is the kickstart for a new conversation, yeah, for the next 1.5 hours, I feel. There's so little I can say because you touch on such deep issues. What I can say is it's another tension. On the one hand, I tend to see this genuine humane spark in every human being that might act out like a monster, even through be it through institutions or in other contexts, I feel I can relate to that. And at the same time, I want to protect, I want to acknowledge that if someone is not really conscious, that spark may not become enacted. and I may have to deal with somebody enacting unconsciousness, so to speak. And I want to protect where the humane qualities are cultivated. And I find it super challenging to navigate that. Who do I invite into what kind of space? Because I've experienced that I create a space and some people just destroy it. And not out of bad intention, but because they cannot face to their own shadows adequately. And that is my learning at the moment, staying aware of how resilient am I to deal with the shadows of others, and at the same time confront my own shadows, and not be ignorant and idealize one side of myself, but be aware also I am a conditioned being, historically, biographically, culturally, and I feel as long as I'm alive, I will sit in that tension, and I don't know how much I will progress in that tension. But I feel, yeah, maybe that's just life, yeah. But of course, I'm sitting with the same struggle like you. I have to stop here because of time, but it's such a deep issue, and I just feel it's a lot about forgiving ourselves that we are in the end human, and yeah, I'm afraid of my own shadows, obviously, and at the same time, I want to also love them as part of that being that I am as long as I live here.
Thank you.
I stop here, but thank you for triggering that topic. I would love to join the conversation on that separately.
We'll come back to it down the trail for sure. Imad, what's your brief comment?
Yeah, not much to add, but just to highlight how important it is. Jim, thank you for bringing it up. Often, everybody sees themselves and want to be seen as the good guys. Nobody almost, does what we don't approve of and think, I don't care what you think, but they believe that they're doing the right thing. Even the worst of acts are being justified, whether by faith or by nationalism or by whatever it is. So it is really a challenge to all of us to actually help those people turn things around and see things and see what they're doing and bring an empathy into leadership. It is a massive challenge. I mean, every situation I look into, I see all the justifications, and everybody feels that they absolutely don't want to do this, but they have to do it when they actually don't have to. And with maybe a little help, as it's not easy, but it is a significant but small shift in perception that magic can happen, and barriers can be broken. So yeah, thank you for that, Jim. Yeah, it's another conversation for another day.
Kristen or Vala.
Yes. You talking about the Nuremberg trials and what this young man said, that these were not bad people, made me think about what I learned when I went to South Africa a couple of years ago, and started looking into it a little bit, but I haven't done enough. But it is what they did after apartheid was ended. Nelson Mandela set up the Reconciliation Commission. So instead of putting people on trial, people were put in front of each other to apologize, to cry, to learn from each other, to see that they were human on both sides. And that seems to have worked. So I'm just wondering, well, yeah. I'm always thinking we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. Is this something that other conflict zones can learn from? Imad, I don't know whether you have looked into the Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. It's actually fascinating. And I know it was incredibly difficult process, but they went through it. And I don't know either how many years it took to bring people together, but it sounds like the right way to go rather than putting people on trial and in prison.
Thank you. Maureen, last word.
Hey, I mean, this is such an important question. It's the cold face, you know. But I do believe in the inherent goodness of every human soul, of every being, and like has been said, when people are shaped, influenced, and conditioned into believing that to do something that causes harm and hurt is really the right thing to do for a cause. And so I think it's coming back to that belief, and unswerving belief in the original goodness of all of us, and that keeping that vision. And this is where we have to be very, very strong inside in our own experience of that, and in nurturing that understanding and experience in others, so that that goodness can really begin to show itself in whether it's in leadership or any institution. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Vala, Thomas, Imad. This has been a very deep session. We've opened up some real issues and fundamental questions as to how we govern ourselves more lovingly. And we will return to this theme down the trail because it is critical that we crack this code if we're going to survive with any semblance of abundance. And it's just worth noting that what was important about Nuremberg is that it was the first time in history that war crimes, crimes against humanity, were adjudicated in a court of law. And it was the first time juridically that the term genocide was used. And it was important for the world to take in the greatest crime in the history of the world and name it as evil and punish those who were guilty. The world needed that. And as Vala pointed out, when Mandela and Desmond Tutu, in the aftermath of apartheid in South Africa, which didn't even come close to what the Nazis did, but was still evil, they bookended Nuremberg. They articulated structurally that evil can be assuaged and redeemed through humane encounter between the opposing parties. And I think the genius of Mandela and Desmond Tutu were that they so personified the truth and the reconciliation in their own beings that they enabled an entire nation and vicariously the world to participate in a process that that enabled South Africa to squeeze through the eye of the needle into a more holistic way of governance, which is still challenged, as we all know, but nevertheless provided an example for potentially the world to come as we consider this question of love in governance. Because when one deals with governance, one deals with structures. And structures have a way of either enhancing humanity or debilitating humanity. So I want to leave us all today with just the conundrum, just the question, and to salute Spirit of Humanity Forum, which will be meeting on the 5th and the 6th of June. Maybe Maureen, you could put the link.
3rd to the 5th, actually.
3rd to the 5th of June.
Yeah.
Maybe you can put the website in the chat so people can get it, but it's Spirit of Humanity Forum. I'm sure people are welcome to join. And then tomorrow, everyone, the 25th of May is the 1st year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And one of the reasons why I've ended this session the way we've ended it, with the complexities of governance and love and all the emotions, is that tomorrow we're going to be listening to a number of Black men in America. How do we understand what happened to George Floyd? How do we understand that George Floyd, of the thousands of Black men that have been killed by white police officers, somehow his death ignited a global expression of awareness of racism and a yearning for a world beyond race? George Floyd has become an icon of our time. Why? How? How do we use that in a way that enhances the redemption of our kind? So that's going to be tomorrow. It's going to be convened by Dr. Karoy Ferguson, who's been on Humanity Rising before, but is deeply aware and deeply concerned about the issue of race in our time. I also want to just point out that in about 10 days' time, we have our first course by Kate Rayworth on donut economics. We're all looking for regeneration. We're looking for a way through. As Chekhov said, you know, it's drop by drop. We squeeze the slave out of ourselves. And Kate Rayworth is going to be offering a course beginning on the 9th of June on donut economics and how we begin to build, again, through collective structures, a regenerative world. So that's coming up on Humanity Rising, Ubiquity University. So thank you, everyone, for the session today. You've opened up very deep and complex issues in a spirit of such love and openness with each other and with us all, that you've exemplified the spirit with which we must take up these very complex challenges. So thank you. And we'll see you all again tomorrow on Humanity Rising. That's all for us today. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Jim, for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Maureen. Thomas, Vala, Imad.
Thank you.
We want you back.
Great.